11. May 1945, Munich. Karl M. 32, a municipal clerk without a municipality, writing in a lined notebook borrowed from a schoolroom blown open to the sky, "We will exchange truth for bread and call it peace." He writes it in pencil. He writes it under the corner of a broken window, the wind lifting grit from the courtyard where porcelain sinks lie in piles like bones. He writes it dangerously. He hides the page inside the cover of an old ledger. He knows why it cannot be spoken. The city around him is a geometry of absence, walls with no roofs, staircases that climb to nothing, 4 of every 5 buildings on his street punched open by fire. The statistics arrive before the verbs. In October 1945, the U.S. Army's Civil Affairs Officer notes in an occupation report from Munich, approximately 45% of housing stock destroyed or uninhabitable, food supply adequate for 800 calories per day by official ration. The mathematics of survival is written in chalk on cellar doors. How many crumbs become a meal? Which rooms still hold a stove? How many bodies to a cot? Trümmerfrauen work in teams of 2. One swings a hammer, one sorts bricks from dust. They stand on mountains of fallen neighborhoods. They wear scarves against the powder. They pick nails from boards and stack reusable bricks in neat, aggressive pyramids. Everything is rationed. Nails, too. These women carry the city in baskets. A woman named Erna, a widow from Giesing, writes in an undated letter saved in a family album and later labeled in a Bundesarchiv, finding aid as Erna G., Munich, 1945. "We are ants. We carry the hill grain by grain. We do not talk about the dead. If we talk, we stop." This is the immediate aftermath. It is concrete and arithmetic. It is missing family members whose names are recited in kitchens to keep their silhouettes from fading. An Allied intelligence summary for Bavaria, June 1945. Public morale, low. Chief concerns, food, shelter, locating relatives. Political attitudes, fatalism, desire for order. The report lists curfew at 2000 Road, search and seizure operations ongoing, party functionaries detained. It lists self-pity as a finding. It does not list shame. Later reports will use words like defeatism and ignorance. They will also count loaves of bread, number of church bells, kilometers of tram line willing to carry people as if they were numbers and not legs. The occupying forces enter and insist on order. The curfew is printed. The rules are printed. At 7:00 p.m., the streets go quiet. U.S. military administration flags hang on municipal facades flayed by shrapnel. The French and British organize their zones in their ways. The Soviets in theirs. The first weeks are a sequence of doors opening to knocks in the night. In the U.S. zone, the military government Law No. 1 declares the suspension of all Nazi organizations. Law No. 5 dissolves the Reich. Lists are made. Lists of party members, lists of press printers, lists of people with authority. Authority is now a dangerous word. There is fear, fear of retribution, fear of being denounced, fear of the Red Army in the East, fear of Allied tribunals, fear of starving before any tribunal opens its doors. Munich, 19 May 1945. Karl writes again, "The curfew is a kind of blessing. It tells us when to stop pretending. By day, people search the rubble for utensils. By night, they listen. There is little to listen to. The radio is silent except for new voices and stern music. The newspapers become short and printed under supervision. The occupation reports remark upon rumor traffic, as if gossip moves like trains. It does move like trains. It carries the displaced. The mathematics of rumor, one neighbor lost to an arrest, produces 6 names whispered in a stairwell. One pack of lucky strikes produces a hat, an apology, and silence. The hunger winter arrives early for some and late for others. The winter of 1946-1947 becomes its own year in diaries. Hunger 46, 1947. People will say for decades, rations drop to 1,000 calories on paper and less in the mouth. Potatoes freeze in the fields. Coal is a rumor. Men and women climb into rail wagons to steal lumps of coal from the floor, an activity reported in an occupation report with a purely mathematical tone. Estimated coal theft per train, 1-2 tons. The black market becomes the only market. Cigarettes are a currency and a culture. American GIs carry fortunes in their pockets and do not know it. In the Tiergarten in Berlin and the English Garden in Munich and under the arcades in Cologne, women and men barter, coat for butter, porcelain figurine for shoe leather, wedding ring for flour. The arithmetic of hunger is precise. 1 egg equals 3 cigarettes. A pound of butter equals 40. A pair of stockings equals 2. A moral economy dissolves into an economy. A U.S. military government political advisor writes in an Allied intelligence summary from January 1947, "The people's political concern is measured in calories. They will support any system that increases them." This is a sentence that is both cold and true. This is the arithmetic of it. After the rubbled months, the paperwork begins. Denazification is a word that is both process and posture. Allied Control Council, Directive No. 38, October 1946, sets categories. The categories are a new taxonomy of neighbors: Hauptschuldig, Belastet, Minderbelastet, Mitlaufer, Entlastet, Mitlaufer, Entlastet, major offenders, offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. Questionnaires, the Fragebogen, arrive in stacks so thick that some desks collapse beneath them. They ask where you were on certain dates and why. They ask what you read and who you met, and when you paid dues to which organization. They ask what you thought by asking what you did. They ask what you knew by asking what you signed. The arithmetic here is also precise, but it pretends to be universal. A life is not a sum, but the form demands it be one. Carl sits at a table in a school classroom in July 1946 answering. His denazification file, now in a brown folder in a Landesarchiv, contains the form. He lists his membership in the party, 1937. He writes, administrative necessity. He lists his work in the city office for food distribution. He writes, we had to fill out forms. He lists the organization he joined because someone said everyone joined. He writes, just followed orders. He writes it in a careful hand that looks like the careful hands of thousands. Minutes from a Sprechkammer hearing in Munich, April 1947. Subject, Karl M. Midlufer. Affidavits 3. A priest, a neighbor, a widow for whom he secured extra milk ration, 1943. The judge is reassuring and impatient. The Sprechkammern are overwhelmed. The system wants thorough justice and also wants to function as government. The mathematics of guilt is adjusted to meet the needs of electricity and clean water and tram timetables. There are those who go to prison. There are those who disappear into Soviet Speziallager. There are those in Landsberg who wait under a future that is mostly mercy. The majority are classified as followers. Allies make rules and then remake them. Some files contain affidavits called Persilshine, certifications of political cleanliness, from colleagues or pastors or people who needed you to be one thing and not another. The word is a joke, and also not. A whitewash is false, and also necessary if you want to have a city administration by September. The arithmetic is unromantic. Keep the electricity, dismiss the man who keeps it, and the electricity fails. So the man stays, and a decision gets its own dusty drawer. The occupation reports note, practical difficulties. The Bundesarchiv records now hold the paper comfort of this pragmatism. Erna, the Trümmerfrau from Giesing, is called to her Spruchkammer too. Her husband is dead. Her file is thin. She is exonerated. She walks home with her children and stands in line at a soup kitchen run by the Lutherans, a USS. Civil Affairs officer writes, "Food lines longest among women with children. The men are less visible. The men are less visible because they are gone or ashamed or both. Displaced persons live nearby. Jews, forced laborers, POWs who do not yet know how or where to go home. DP camps become cities. In the US zone, at Feldafing and Fehrenbold, at Landsberg and Babenhausen, men and women live in barracks and organize schools and newspapers and a kind of governance. They sell needlework. They marry. They look for relatives. They walk past Germans who look at the ground. The contact is limited and explosive." An occupation report on DP-German relations, Bavaria, September 1946, tensions remain high. Blacks, African-American soldiers treated more favorably by Jews than by German populace. Recent incidents on black market between DPs and locals. The language of the report is exhausted. It cannot say what the camps contain, bodies that came out of organized murder alive. It cannot say what the towns contain, neighbors who saw smoke or saw trucks or saw nothing and now say they saw nothing. An Allied documentary team filming near Dachau writes in their production journal, "Villagers express surprise. The crematorium chimney is visible from the baker's oven. The mathematics of denial is not written down, it is performed. But sometimes people saw and wrote." A Catholic priest in a parish near Landsberg writes an entry preserved in an archdiocesan archive, "We did not know. That is what is said. I, however, remember the smell." A German nurse who worked near a DP hospital writes to her sister, "They are alive as proof." A handful of these letters survive, tucked into family Bibles, resurfacing decades later in oral histories recorded by local universities. Karl goes to Feldafing once to deliver forms. He stands at the gate while a DP policeman checks his papers. He grips his satchel. Behind the fence, there are laundry lines and boys playing with a ball made of bound rags and women in dresses from American aid parcels. A man with numbers on his forearm is writing a petition in Polish and Yiddish. Karl writes in his notebook, "They are near and also far. They do not look at me. I am grateful." He does not write what he sees in his mind, a map of the city with the rail lines marked in thick pencil. The displaced are not only those in camps. Millions of Germans are also displaced. Expellees arrive from Silesia, East Prussia, the Sudetenland, from Pomerania, from areas now called by different names, spoken with different tongues. They arrive by foot and by cart and by train, columns that carry their winter tools in the summer. They bring children and trunks and a story they do not stop telling. Between 1945 and 1950, roughly 12 million come into a western half country that can barely house those already there. The arithmetic of it is pitiless. A town of 10,000 receives 3,000 from elsewhere. A village of 600 becomes a village of 1,100, with no new roofs, no new barns. Karl's new job in 1947 is at the Office for Housing Allocation in Munich. Denazification has returned him to a desk. His task is simple and impossible. He has a wall map with colored pins for apartments. He has files for families. He has a list from a district chief. We must prioritize widows, war invalids, families with infants, and civil servants needed for municipal function. He also has a list from the Expellee office. The lists do not match. The arithmetic of scarce rooms becomes a battlefield of petitions. A clerk in his office, a woman with a hired bicycle and a sharp pencil, reads aloud numbers without emotion. 2 rooms, 1 stove, 6 persons. Assign another, 3. Carl signs. He thinks about the stove. The neighbors will complain. He will hear them in the corridor by the public counter. They will bring him letters. They will bring him their father's medals. They will bring him a photograph of a house that no longer exists. They will bring him anger shaped like memory. A woman from Sudetenland writes, "We are not beggars, we had orchards." A man from Schwabing writes, "I fought for this city." An expellee boy stands by the door and stares at the map because maps do not answer back. The terms are invented. Locusts for newcomers, arrogance for locals. The tensions are physical. A 1949 Bavarian Interior Ministry report files numerous cases of expellee local conflict and uses the word resentment as if it were a measurable commodity. The mathematics of scarce jobs makes enemies that history will later pretend not to know. The offices live on paper. So do the streets. A business license requires proof of political reliability. Appeals for more coal require proof of all the mouths you feed. The forms are a democratized suspicion. The Spruchkammer system is winding down because occupation policy is changing. The Cold War draws new lines on maps. Communists and reliables now replace guilty and less guilty in file headings. Informants report on meetings. Informants report on meetings. The Allied intelligence summaries shift tone. The threat is now to the east. The West Germans learn the mathematics of this shift automatically. The value of a former affiliation is recalculated in the new currency. It is not that denazification is forgotten. It is that its arithmetic is rewritten to fit a new budget. The Amtsblatt announces amnesty measures. Barred civil servants are reclassified under Article 31 of the Basic Law. A teacher with a party badge returns to his classroom because the classroom cannot stay empty. An engineer who built for war now builds for water. The mathematics of guilt becomes a roster of musts. The files close. The land opens for rebuilding. On 20 June 1948, currency reform flips coin and conscience. The Deutsche Mark appears. The new bills are crisp and look like promises. The old Reichsmarks turn into wallpaper. The shop windows fill overnight. A housewife writes in an oral history recorded in the 1970s, "On Saturday, nothing. On Sunday, goods everywhere." It was like magic, and not magic. It was storage and fear and a system of waiting. It was also policy. Ludwig Erhard becomes a name people say with a small secret grin when they find coffee in their cups. The Marshall Plan ships powdered milk and tractors and machine tools. The crates are stenciled with ECA and the names of American cities that now exist in German kitchens as labels on condensed milk cans. The mathematics of kindness becomes a ledger. In 1949, the US sent X tons. In 1950, the new mill produced Y tons of flour. There are charts in occupation reports showing bars rising. There are photographs with men in clean shirts turning lathes. Carl is assigned to the new Office for Economic Affairs in 1950, then to the Department for City Rebuilding. He carries a leather portfolio that makes him look equal parts bureaucrat and survivor. He is rising. He is also careful. He jokes with colleagues that he reads directives before he reads the morning newspaper. He files memos on the placement of a new tram line where a synagogue once stood. He files memos on the expropriation of a bomb site. He files memos on the harmonious integration of expellee housing within existing neighborhoods. Each memo is clean, typed, official. He still writes in his notebook. He writes in April 1951, "The democracy we are building wants us upright and forward. It tolerates looking back if we do not stare." He attends a meeting where a visiting American economist asks about industrial productivity and wage restraint. He attends a church service where a priest reads the names of those lost to bombs and calls the dead victims of war. There is silence at the words. There is less silence at the absence of other words. School books appear that explain the recent past in diagrams, the way old school books explained the water cycle. They show a rising man, a falling nation, bombs, hunger, rebuilding. They show a map of a divided country shaded in sympathetic grey. They do not show neighbours with numbers on their arms. They do not show deportation schedules. The arithmetic of memory is taught as an equation with an unknown. We did not know. We suffered. We rebuilt. Therefore we deserve. It is not malicious. It is systemic. Public commemorations focus on ruins and the dead from bombing and the expelled from the East. Curtains of official sorrow hang in city halls. The expellés form associations that attest to loss. Tag der Heimat parades fill streets with banners that say Recht auf Heimat. The volume of this noise makes other things inaudible. The new democracy rests on unspoken bargains. Many of them are not cynical. They are pragmatic. Adenauer calls for no experiments. He calls for anchoring. He calls for a West that Konrad Adenauer pronounces like a parent. The Cold War provides both cover and enemies. Rearmament debates announce that the past is an obstacle to the present. The mathematics of alliance requires a certain amnesia. But amnesia is a bad word. Call it selection. In a 1953 Allied intelligence summary, now a bland file with a blue cover in a Washington archive, a German analyst writes anonymously, "The public mood values stability more than justice." He lightly speaks about wages. He accidentally speaks about trial calendars. That does not mean there is no justice. Trials occur. The Einsatzgruppen trial in 1958 is a stone dropped into a pond of family dinners. The Frankfurt Auschwitz trials beginning in 1963 are a meteor that lands on tables in quiet apartments. Documents reappear, memories are sworn, newspapers print names. A generation learning the multiplication tables of the Wirtschaftswunder stumbles over different numbers, 6 million. The mathematics of this number does not fit anywhere and cannot be broken down into decimals that fit in a file. The Bundesarchiv crinkles with activity. Prosecutors write letters. The old Spruchkammer files are read again for new sequences of names. Karl attends a lecture in 1964, organized by a group of younger municipal employees. The topic is civic responsibility and past crimes. A speaker quotes from the Auschwitz trials. Those who made sure the trains ran on time were necessary. Karl looks at his hands. They are hands that stamp forms. He stops writing his notebook for a month. His son comes home from school with a new textbook. It includes photographs of Ravensbrück and a paragraph that uses the word Juden, clearly without euphemism. The school holds a moment of silence for November 1938. The son asks a question with the innocence and cruelty of children. What did you do? The reply is both a sentence and a system. We survived. It is true. It is also not the whole truth. Truth has been measured in half portions for 2 decades. There is still the arithmetic of rooms. Even into the 1950s, expellee families remain in house corners, negotiating a timetable for using the stove. A woman from Königsberg writes in 1952 in an expellee association newsletter, "We share carpets with strangers. It becomes normal." A local man writes in a letter to the editor, "They have been here 7 years. They should be from here now." The newsletter prints them side by side. The mathematics of belonging is not simple. Displaced persons' camps shrink and change. Many survivors leave for Israel, the United States, Canada. Some remain, become German citizens, run small shops, keep books of prayers that are older than the city. German towns that learned to pretend the camps were somewhere else now encounter names in phone books they had not read before 1933. Recognition is a slow-burning thing. It changes what people do with silence. The rebuilding is miraculous and also planned. Industrial output doubles, new factories along the Isar hum. A machine tool company that once made parts for a different kind of machine advertises lathes with smiling men in clean work coats. A man named Erhard discusses the social market economy on the radio with a voice like smooth enamel. Care packages continue to arrive from sympathetic strangers whose names become more familiar to German children than the names of nearby villages. A boy in Carl Street says, Philadelphia, as if it were a brand of candy. A poster announces the arrival of new trams and positions the tram in front of a future. But the future is a place built on the mathematics of compromise. Article 31 reinstates thousands. There is a law in 1951 that rebalances pensions for former public servants. The words Mitlaufer and Entlastite have become a bureaucratic dialect that signals eligibility as much as morality. A city waterworks manager who was once dismissed returns to his office with a handshake and without a ceremony. A judge who signed sentences that now look like atrocities writes an article about administrative law. This is not a simplification. This is a system. The system has to work or the lights go out. The system works, the lights stay on. The price is measured in things not named. In his notebook, 9 November 1955, Carl writes, "We have learned to draw a curtain that is also a wall and call it tact." He writes in another line, "The Republic relies on people who know how to file. We file things, also our shame." At home, the conversations are coded. Someone says, "Then the sirens." Someone else says, "And the cellar." Third says, "And now it is better." The old neighbors from the DP camp have left. The new neighbors from Silesia bake cakes that taste of a different kind of butter. It becomes hard to remember that in 1945, the street had no roofs. Photographs help. They show rubble and children playing among bricks that look like anthills. It is hard to connect those anthills to the new shop fronts that smell of fruit and metal. An Allied occupation report from late 1949 includes a sentence that could be the narration for an entire decade. The populace, while outwardly docile and industrious, shows signs of moral fatigue. It is a bureaucratic description of a spiritual thing. Moral fatigue looks like a man who does not finish sentences. It looks like a woman who changes the subject. It looks like a town that builds a new memorial to the dead of all wars without listing names. It looks like school books that begin to change, slowly, with photographs that cannot be ignored. There are cracks. There is the Eichmann trial broadcast across continents to living rooms where German families sit in the evening and wonder if the volume is too loud. There is a protest by students in the late 1960s shouting at fathers who are, in their own prose, tired. There is a mayor in a small town who stands up on a cold autumn day and says the word murder, and then stands there afterward as if he is at a grave. Carl is not a celebrity of conscience. He is not a villain. He is one of the necessary men. He fills forms. He allocates scarce things. He argues with his wife about buying a radio or fixing the roof. He votes. He stands in a line at City Hall to shake hands with an American municipal delegation and accept the donation of a fire engine. In 1950, an Allied intelligence summary noted, "Public neutral to favorable view of Americans, increasingly wary of Soviets, indifferent to British." By 1960, the Germans feel like they have become their own people again. The term sovereignty is used and misused. The term Vergangenheitsbewältigung appears in newspapers and then in dictionaries that include compound words as if they were lifeboats. Carl remembers the day he stood at the DP camp gate. He writes in the notebook, 16 March 1963, the day after the newspaper writes about Auschwitz. We pretend we did not hear to protect our ears, not to protect the guilty. And yet it is the same. He crosses it out. He writes instead, we do not know how to be good, but we know how to be orderly. Perhaps that is enough for a city. It is not enough. It is what exists. The mathematics of reparation is bureaucratic and heartfelt. The Federal Republic pays, and the checks arrive with amounts that look both generous and insulting. They cannot measure the thing they attempt to count. The men who sign them make the motions careful. The law offices that process them fill with paper that does not recognize faces. Carl does not work in that department. He processes tramline permits. His colleagues in the compensation office develop a vocabulary of regret. Unverhältnism, mäßig, bedauerlich. The files move. The money moves. The past remains. The effort is not nothing. It is also not everything. A Bundesarchive document from 1974 lists the number of denazification cases completed, the number of amnesties granted, the number of reappointed officials. The numbers look like success. The arithmetic of democracy loves numbers because numbers are less dangerous than names. But the names are still there on the inside of skulls. They are in the notebooks of men like Carl. The Cold War continues to shape the city. The US Army stays. The barracks get cleaner. The chocolates get crisp. The new generation learns to imitate the sound of American pop songs on German tongues. The Berlin Wall rises, and the reaction in Munich is visible in bus stops. People look up from their newspapers and meet other people's eyes in a way they do not often do. The mathematics of fear returns and then is filed away again. At work, the old files are moved to a basement. Water pipes sweat. The corners of files curl. Dust becomes another archive. You can date a document by its taste. The archivist writes a memo. We require new shelving. Carl signs off on the budget. He is part of the chain that keeps paper from becoming pulp. It is oddly comforting. There are reunions of expellee associations. There are exhibitions on bombing and survival. There are long-distance cousins who arrive from the East after 1956, and then again after 1956, and then again after 1961. The categories used in 1946, guilty follower, do not apply. The categories used now are relative, guest, misfit, other. The city is full. It still finds room. The entire period could be described as a negotiation with scarcity disguised as a city plan. Scarcity of food, of rooms, of moral clarity, of memory. The arithmetic changes, but the calculation continues. People grow old. Children leave. Prosperity contains within it a kind of erasure. New buildings cover old holes. The holes exist below the ground floor, which houses a shop that sells record players to people who no longer remember what surviving sounded like. In 1977, Carl retires. He receives a certificate. He receives a watch. He receives a handshake from a man who was a child in 1945. He walks home across a city that once was rubble and is now a lost machine. He sits at his kitchen table and takes out the notebook with the soft cover. Inside, the handwriting totters across decades. It is not the same man who began. It is the same hand. He writes, 8 May 1945 to today. I have learned that the war after the war is paperwork, he writes. We did not tell the truth because there was bread. We ate. We rebuilt. We called that victory. The sentence is dangerous and honest and still cannot be said aloud in any ceremony he knows. He writes it down anyway. He reads old entries. A quote from the Allied intelligence summary about calories as politics. A note on the DP camp gate, a sketch of a room allocation chart with names erased, a copy of a memo he typed in 1952, refusing an applicant because the street already had 2 families sharing a single toilet. He remembers the face of the woman. He remembers the exact tone she used when she said, "Please." He remembers the night he went home and told his wife that he had done his job and did not feel satisfied. He remembers the times when ex-Nazis were promoted because they were competent and other men were not. He remembers that competence saved lives. He remembers that explanation is not exoneration. He writes that sentence. He underlines it. On a page dated 9 November 1978, he writes, "School children lit candles today. They walked past the place where our synagogue stood. I stood in the back. I did not know where to put my hands." He hears in his mind the domestic sound of a door closing, the same sound he has heard his entire life, the sound of a file drawer sliding shut. An oral history recorded in 1983 finds him. A young woman with a tape recorder sits in his living room and asks questions that are fine-tuned to pierce things but not to destroy them. He answers. He uses the word Mitläufer but attaches to it his own footnotes. He says, "We too suffered because he did." He says, "They suffered more because they did." He says, "They suffered more because they did." He says, "I did what I could because he believes it." He says, "I might have done more," and his mouth dries on the more. The tape stops. He offers coffee. He is polite. He is precise. It is easy to end stories with ceremonies. It is easier to end them with declarations. People want closure like a lid on a pot. Carl has learned lids keep steam in. They do not eliminate it. 14. February 1985, in his notebook, he writes, "We continue to eat with the same mouths we used to be silent. The line is artificial and true. He knows it. He writes it for himself. The files are now called history. Students sit in archives and read his memos, and the Spruchkammer judgments and the occupation reports. They ask questions like, how did this happen? Meaning, how did denazification fail or work? And also, how did men and women decide to decide in the way they did? The archivists answer with box numbers. The slant of the K in his handwriting attracts a graduate student in 1991. She copies the line, "We will exchange truth for bread and call it peace." She reads it with the astonished privilege of distance. She underlines it with a pencil that smears the old pencil beneath. Before that future, in 1982, the city unveils a plaque listing Jewish families deported from one street. Names are a kind of undoing of decades of arithmetic. They do not submit to the logic of calories or rooms. People stand in front of the plaque and count how many they can say out loud without their voice breaking. Some get to 5. Some cannot start. A man with a balloon in his hand explaining it to a child does not know how to explain the concept of a train that leaves without being announced. Carl whispers a sentence he wrote, then crosses himself, then stands still. The wind is the same wind that lifted grit in 1945. It has fewer bricks to move around now. It moves the leaves of a tree planted too recently to cast shade. It is not that the country built itself on silence alone. It built itself on labor, foreign generosity, luck, new borders, special economists, frightened priests, careful clerks, hungry women, stubborn children, the physics of steel, the chemistry of flour. It wrote laws that corrected and laws that evaded. It held trials that taught and trials that failed. Both are true, and both exist in archives that can be located with shelf marks. The cold language of occupation reports, the bureaucratic listings of Spruchkammer judgments. These are not the only voices, but they are necessary in a choir that includes whispered prayers and shouted slogans and the sound of pickaxes hitting mortar. The arithmetic of guilt never totals. It remains a ledger with entries crossed out and re-entered under different headings. The mathematics of rooms becomes the mathematics of memorials. How much space do names take on a wall? Which wall, who decides? Karl, older, writes smaller. He returns to the line he wrote the week Germany surrendered. He copies it into a new notebook bought in a stationer's shop that did not exist when he needed paper most. He notices the neatness of the counter. He notices the neatness of the counter. He notices the politeness of the clerk. He notices the fragility of his own pen. He writes, in 1989, as a wall in Berlin is being dismantled, live on television, as he hears cheering and the sound of hammers hitting history, we know how to celebrate. We will have to learn how to remember twice as well. There is one more line in his notebook, dated without a day in 1990, written after a man with a tape machine asks him to say something concise for a project on the long post-war. He tries to. He writes, "The front line after 1945 ran through our files and our thoughts. I signed papers like a soldier pulling a trigger in reverse. I hope the recoil was not too small." He closes the notebook. He places it on a shelf above the kitchen table. He returns to the place where he started, a city measured in calories and bricks and the durable grammar of forms. He understands that for civilians like him, who never fired a shot and yet compiled numbers that shaped lives, the war after the war was the long practice of the opening sentence, exchanging some truth for some bread, and deciding, in every year and every office and every conversation, how much truth to save for the next meal. And he knows, without saying it aloud where anyone can hear, that the front line after 1945 ran through his memory and his paperwork, not across a battlefield.